Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. My name is Bernard Alvarez, and I'm going to be sharing the next hour with you. Today, we're going to be talking about paranormal experiences and the awakening. I feel that the paranormal experiences that many of us have, especially right now, may be a part of this global awakening phenomenon that's happening around the world. One of the most prevalent things that I hear from people that are going through the awakening is the greater sense of intuition, psychic abilities, all of these wonderful, what we consider paranormal or supernatural, I feel is actually very natural and very normal for many of us, but we seem to kind of brush them aside as something that we're embarrassed to talk about, or we think that we're going crazy, and I don't feel that's the case at all. Now, are some people having psychotic moments? I'm sure, but it may not be as prevalent in that way as it is in the natural way of our evolution as human beings. And if anyone has ever seen, and I talk about this quite a bit, the film or read the book, oh geez, I'm going to forget it, of course. Oh, the Celestine Prophecy, where there's my favorite scene in that film is where they kind of like meld into another dimension. They're being chased by these Sandinistas, for lack of a better term. A militia is running after the quote-unquote heroes of the story, and they run into this area, and all of a sudden, these people can't see them anymore. They've kind of moved on to what I would think is 5D. And right there is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the ascension process. As we're evolving as a humanity, we're going to be able to see through the veil, through the illusion. And as we are seeing through the illusion and seeing through the veil, we're going to see a lot of things we may not be used to seeing, or feeling things that we're not used to feeling. So I figured, well, let me share some of my experiences that I've had growing up, and to this day with some of our listeners and our viewers, so maybe you know that you're not going crazy, or if you're crazy like Bernard. Anyway, so let me start off back. My first experience, I was probably about 3 or 4 years old. And it was very scary for me. It was a very scary experience, and to this day, I still have like traumatic memories about it. It's nothing wonderful, and of course, a lot of first-time paranormal experiences are going to be scary to us that are not used to it. But I remember that again, I was about 3 years old. I think I had gotten home from nursery school or pre-K or whatever it was back then, whatever they call it now. And I remember my mom was in the kitchen, and she was making me SpaghettiOs. Remember, every kid loves SpaghettiOs. And I remember she was making me SpaghettiOs, and I was waiting for the SpaghettiOs to be done. So I was walking in her room, and I love to play, little kid. I like to hide in her closet and hide behind the clothes racks and make a little fort and whatnot. And I remember going into her bedroom and going into her, she had a big walk-in closet. My parents had a big walk-in closet with a sliding door. And I slid open the door, and this being, and I'll tell you more about it in just a minute, I'll describe it a little more, but this little being, probably not much taller than I was at 3 years old, literally jumped out at me, grabbed my hands, and tried to, like, for lack of a better term, eat my fingers. They were putting my hands in their mouth. It's like they clutched my hands and started, like, gnawing on my fingers and my hands, and I ran out screaming and, freaking out. And my mom, what happened? What happened? I'm like, the witch is trying to eat me. The witch is trying to eat me. And it's very interesting. I mean, now I can laugh about it, but it was traumatizing. It scared the heck out of me. This creature disappeared, after I freaked out and ran away. Of course, I'm pulling my mom back into her room to look at it, and it wasn't there, and there was, like, no sign of it, of course. And many, many years later, I was speaking with one of my teachers, one of my spiritual teachers, the Reverend Rel Davis, who's passed on now. Thank you, Rel, for all that you've taught me. And I was describing the experience to him, and he said, "Well, what did it look like?" I was like, "Well, it looked like the witch from Snow White." And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it had a cloak, and it had robes or whatever. It was really freaky looking." I said, "It looked like an old hag." And he's like, "Well, what was it wearing? This and that." And I described, what it looked like and what it was wearing. And he said, "That's a babushka." Apparently, it's a Russian. Well, he called it a Russian, paranormal creature or whatever that was known in that area. But what got to me was he said, he goes, "The key thing here is that it was trying to eat your hands." And I was like, "Yeah." I said, "What's the big deal?" He said, "Our hands are where we have our power, magically speaking. As light workers, as healers, as, pagans, witches, magicians, whatever term you'd like to use, that our power is in our hands." He said, "This being was trying to suck out your power." And that really, really hit a nerve for me because, I'll go on to talk a little bit more about some of the other experiences I had. But, today, as a healer, yeah, my hands are where my power is. As a metaphysician and magician and pagan and whatnot, I use my hands. And as you can see, I like to use my hands a lot. If you're watching me live, my hands are very much a part of who I am and how I express myself. So to hear that this being was trying to suck the energy out of my hands really, really struck a nerve with me. But anyway, so that's one of the experiences that I've had. I've had many, many more, especially at a young age. And I'm just wondering, Triva, can you remember any weird stuff that you went through when you were a kid? Did you have any paranormal stuff going on? Did you ever see any ghosts or spirits or anything like that?
Uh, Most of my experiences were when I was an adult, but my childhood
Oh,
experiences were mostly like, your usual thing. You think there's a spirit like standing next to your bed or a ghost or something, so you put the covers over your head and you either fall asleep or you wait for it to like um go away. But
right.
most of my experiences that I remember are in my adulthood,
Oh,
I
okay.
guess. So
So it started happening, I guess, after puberty, maybe?
yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Well, we're gonna have to talk more about that as we move into the teen years. Absolutely, very cool. Well, I'm glad it didn't happen to you early on because it was, it can be quite traumatizing when you're a child. I wonder how many other people out there have had paranormal experiences when they were young. And if you did, please, comment and share that with us if you're watching or on Facebook or on Revolution Radio. But so anyway, again, that babushka thing, and I'll just going to call the babushka. I can't confirm it, but again, this is a hearsay. Somebody said it was a babushka spirit or whatever. But the same thing happened, very similar thing happened to me a few years later. And it's very interesting because I was having a nightmare or something like that. And of course, what do you do when you're a little kid? You run and climb into bed with your parents. And I remember I was sleeping between my parents, and I look up, and there's this thing again, and it's just pointing at me and looking at me and just staring at me. And of course, I wake my parents up, and they don't see anything. But again, moving forward now, something else happened, which was very, very different. Um, when I was probably about, oh, let's say 11 years old. I was watching, remember the film Grease? God, I'm giving away my age now. I was 11 when Grease came out. We were watching it on TV. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was way before cable. It was like this service that you paid like $30 a month, which was outrageous back then, to watch one movie channel. Anyway, they were playing Grease, and I remember I was sitting in my living room watching the movie with my cousin, who lived a couple houses down, and we're watching the movie, and he got up to go to the bathroom, and I remember him getting up to go to the bathroom, and I heard him open the door, and I saw him walk out the hall back into the living room, and then all of a sudden, boom! Instantly, the same thing happened. All of a sudden, he was opening the door of the bathroom again, and he was walking out the hall. It was almost like a record skipped. And someone had mentioned it's a time slip, that maybe time was correcting itself with me. And I've never experienced that again. It's the only time that that's ever happened to me. But I found that very interesting that, time slipped. I mean, what else can I call it? And it really didn't freak me out. I just thought it was really cool. I was like, oh, wow, this is very interesting. And again, it never really ever happened to me again. But I think it's fair to say that the house that I grew up in was haunted. Something was going on there. To this day, I still have. Whenever I have a nightmare, it's about being in that house. Again, something paranormal or creepy or something going on in that house. Some spirits coming through or whatnot. But to move on a little bit and to go a little bit further in the years, gee, I hope I don't miss any of them. Have had so many of them. Well, here's another very interesting thing that happened to me. My neighbor was doing card reading. She was a teenager at the time, and she was reading the cards, and she was reading a regular deck of cards, not a tarot deck, but a regular deck of cards. And she was like, "Oh, here, let me do a reading for you." And she did the reading. I was like, "Oh, I want to learn how to do it." And she kind of explained to me like how to lay out the setting or whatnot, but I immediately took to it. It was almost as if I had known how to do it before. It was very um, natural to me, and I just started reading all the neighbor kids using a regular deck of cards. And I was maybe, again, about 11 or 12 years old, and I think that's probably when things started really gearing up. Things started getting even more paranormal, more strange. And again, I took to it like water. I found it so easy. It was almost like remembering. I didn't know anything about reincarnation or past lives or anything like that. But to take to it so naturally, like a fish to water, was very interesting. And to this day, it's funny how as I started going through puberty, I forgot a lot of the stuff that happened to me growing up as a small child, and I kind of lost some of those gifts. I remember having my bike chain break. Very, very interesting. And again, you can believe it or not, but this is what I remember, was that my bike chain broke, and I was so upset that my bike chain broke. And I remember I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and I just remember wishing my bike chain would be fixed, wishing my bike chain would be fixed. And I'm holding the bike chain, and I'm holding it really tight, and just wishing it and willing it, and it fixed. All of a sudden, the chain wasn't broken anymore. Um, Again, manifestation. I had no idea what it was. I just thought it was a part of life. I just thought it was normal. I had no concept of paranormal or supernatural. It was just like, I want this and it's going to happen, and it did. It was just very much a part of my being, a part of my experience growing up. Um, so moving up a little bit, and I want to go into a little bit more scarier stuff. Growing up a few more years, um, I had, as many of you know, I was adopted by a Cuban family. My father was from Spain, and he grew up in Cuba, or vice versa. I forgot what it was. But anyway, my parents both were in Miami, and I was raised in Miami in the 70s and 80s to a Cuban family. And as you know, many people in the Caribbean cultures are either comfortable with, or a lot of them get involved in Santeria, which is Yoruba magic. Close, similar to voodoo and whatnot, but the Cuban version of it. And a lot of my family members were involved in Santeria at the time. At that time, many of them have since converted to Pentecostalism, but at that time, I remember just seeing a lot of saints around the house, and my mother putting apples and coins and cigars and rum and all this kind of stuff around the house in front of these statues. But at the time, the story that I'm talking about now, I was probably about 12 or 13 years old, and I had a cousin who was going through the initiation process. Now, I don't know how many of you know about Santeria or the Yoruba practices, but the initiation process that he went through was very grueling. He had to go through a fast. He had to wear white all the time. He went through a fast and whatnot, and apparently it didn't go so well. And I'll tell you what I mean. During the night, again, I was probably about 13 years old. It was in the early 80s. During the night, I was having a dream that my family was gathered in front of my house, and we were all standing underneath the big tree out front. It was a big ficus tree, and it shaded the entire front one half of the front yard. And underneath, and I played in that tree all the time, and I had swings and whatnot. And we had a little tree house type thing, or we used it as a tree house. Anyway, in the dream, we were all in underneath the tree standing in a circle, and I was like, what's going on? In the dream, I'm going, what is going on? And I notice as I go through the crowd, through the people in my family, they're all looking down into a hole. And I was like, oh my God, this is freaky. What is it? And I go to look down into the hole, and there was my cousin laying in the hole, and he was sticking his arm up to me, and he was grabbing my hand, and he seemed very scared and very nervous or whatnot, traumatized or whatnot. At this very moment, in the dream, as this is happening to me, my mother, in real time or waking time, my mother had run into the room and was shaking me awake, and she was very distraught, and she was crying and whatnot. And she was like, get up, we have to go, we have to go. I was like, what happened? She said, your cousin tried to kill himself. And unfortunately, he did pass away, and I'm very sorry for that, and may his soul be at peace. But that really freaked me out. That was me. I felt like he was trying to communicate with me looking back on it. So that was a very traumatizing paranormal experience. Moving up a few years, when I got involved in paganism back then, witchcraft, Wicca, I had always been very interested. I had always been very curious. And it wasn't because of the Santeria. I wasn't attracted to Santeria. I was very attracted to Native American and Celtic. And it's very interesting because it wasn't until my father passed away in 97, I think, 96, 97, that my mother told me the truth about who my family was, my birth family. And my father used to always tell me, oh, your real parents were from Spain. And my mother's like, nah, she was just trying to bring out Spanish pride in you, because his family was from Spain or whatnot. She said, no, your mother was an Indian and your father's from Ireland. And I was like, that's where this comes from. I had always been attracted to Native American practice and Celtic magic, paganism, witchcraft, whatnot. Excuse me. And so going back now to my interests, there wasn't that much available. We didn't have the internet in the early 80s or the late 70s or whatnot. I used to have to go to the library. And we'd go, me and my friends would be interested, and we'd go into the occult section and read all the books and giggle and, ooh, look at that, or, try to uh, learn something. And it was just a matter of learning something. Anyway, at the time, I didn't know anything. I didn't know the difference between uh, paganism and Satanism. I didn't know the difference between Celtic or Native American. I just knew what I was drawn to and what I was called to and was interested in. But anyway, as young kids do, we decided we were going to create our own coven. And I'm sure many teenagers out there, and I hear it all the time. Oh, I'm starting a coven. I'm like, you're 15, you know nothing, but that's what young people do. And so me and about 4 or 5 friends decided we were going to start a coven. And actually, I'm still friends with some of them, and on Facebook. So if you're listening, the story's about you, but I won't give away your name. But and we got involved in a little bit of the darker stuff, and I kind of got freaked out, and I started backing away from it. Back then it was all about Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne and Mr. Crowley and Aleister Crowley and whatnot, but we didn't know any better, and it kind of freaked me out. And we were a couple of them, and one particular friend in particular was getting involved with another group that actually was an organized, darker magic aspect type thing of group. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to get involved in this. And one night, I was laying in bed, and my room was in the very back of the house. It's a small house, but it had 4 bedrooms in North Miami. And I remember wanting to, like, something was calling me into the bathroom. Very weird sensation. And I just remember being really, really scared. And I got up. It was at night. My parents were in literally the other corner of the house, in the front of the house. And I started walking toward the bathroom, and it was, of course, the house is completely dark. And I'm going around into the hallway. I had to do like a U through the house to go back toward the bathroom that I use. And I open the door and I turn on the light, and the curtain flew open, and I saw this Baphomet type figure sitting on top of my friend, and my friend again reaching out for help or whatnot. I called him right away. I was like, you cannot get involved with these people. I was like, do not get involved with these people. There's something very wrong here. And I got all freaked out. And we kind of drifted apart after that and have become friends again since then. But the stories that I heard of what happened throughout those years were not very good. A lot of shady things going on, getting mixed up with some of the darker aspects of the underworld in South Florida at that time. I guess we all were a little bit growing up. But that was a very profound experience for me, and I flipped the other way and became a born again for about 2 years after that. I was like, oh no no no, I'm going straight back to the light, and that does happen to a lot of people when they get fearful. They cling to what they know instead of going through the fear. But that's a whole nother aspect. This was just an experience that I had, and I started going to church again every day and getting involved. And I was very drawn to the Catholic Mass for some reason, and now I know why. But I love the incense and the candles and all that, and again was just very born again-y like for about a year or two after that. And during that time, though, my grandmother had passed away. I was again, mid-teens, early teens, or whatnot. My grandmother had passed away, and in my room, a very interesting thing, another weird story that happened. I was laying in back then I had a water bed. Remember the 80s? I had a water bed, and I had these diamond mirrors with carpeting around them on paneled wall. Very 80s. But anyway, these diamonds there was like 4 and then 2 and then 4, and they all had like this shag carpeting around it, it was a real like hangout, stoner room, for lack of a better term. And I wasn't, though, that night. And I'm laying in bed, and I felt something. I felt or noticed something out of the corner of my eye, and literally my grandmother had come through the mirror and was like hovering over me. but she wasn't scary. She was like looking at me very lovingly, and it freaked me out a little bit. But it was almost at that point when I realized I didn't need to be scared of this. That I am safe. That I am of the light, and things got better after that. And we're going to talk a little bit more after this commercial break. We'll be right back.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
I wanted to ask Triva, now that I'm getting into the older segment of my life, you were saying that you had some paranormal experiences as you got older. Can you remember the first time, or can you remember one that happened that really stuck out in your brain and your mind?
Yes. The very first one that I could remember was when I was still living with my parents. Um, I think I was in my last year of high school. I was sharing a room with my twin brother, and I had woken up to see this, like I guess, thin, I guess average height, thin, kind of like being. Like, I guess it was a shadow being standing at the end of my bed, and it kind of looked like it was doing some weird little dance.
Huh.
And I remember sitting up, but it wasn't control, and I raised my hand and I kind of like poked the side of one of my fingers with one of its nails, and I fell down back to sleep, and I woke up, in the morning.
Oh, what was
And
that?
of course, I told my mom, and she goes, "Oh my God, we're all going to hell." And was
Oh
like,
no.
so, and my mom was that kind of person. But that was the first one that I remember.
Oh wow. How old were you when that happened? Do you?
Um, Late teens, I think.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Very
It
interesting.
was very, yeah.
I was going to say I've only had one experience. And you brought one to mind. Thank you. Of
Hmm.
where I felt physical contact with a spirit or whatnot, and mine was much worse though. It was probably, gosh, it was right. Very interesting. Right before I had my spiritual awakening and did my shamanic vision quest. It was probably about a year before, and I remember I was living in Dunedin, Florida, in the Tampa Bay area at the time, and I used to go down back to North Miami Beach and visit my family, and had a little apartment down there. And I remember I was sleeping in the bed, and I saw someone walk in the room. It was like I was sleeping, and it's probably similar to what you're talking about, like a sleep paralysis type thing. And I felt like I couldn't move. I opened my eyes and I saw this being, and it looked like a regular person. I remember clearly it was blue jeans and a white T-shirt, and they walked up next to the bed and they put their hands around my neck, and I couldn't see them. It was like my head was turned to the side, and I could see their waist and the jeans, and I remember the zipper and whatnot, and they had their hands on my neck, and I couldn't move. I couldn't move, and suddenly, boom, it was gone. It completely disappeared. And again, it felt like it brings me back to that memory of being attacked for my power, or whatever you want to call it, when I was a little kid. That's what it reminded me of, that something was kind of trying to attack me. Uh, with that being said, very interesting. I did speak to someone, actually a high magician, years later, talking about it. And he kind of read my aura, or read my lifeline or past lives or whatnot, and I told him all about this, and he said, this has nothing to do with your past lives. This has to do with your families. And I'm like, what do you mean, my birth family? He said, no, when you got adopted into this family, their karma and whatnot became yours as well, and yours became theirs. And he said, there's something there. He goes, you should find out if you're, he said, something to do with your great grandfather. And later on, I found out that my great grandfather was not a very nice man. So I don't know what went on, and or what they got involved with back in the late 1800s or early 1900s down in Havana, but something must have pissed off something. But anyway, I do want to talk about my spiritual vision quest a little bit, and I've told the story many times, but this was literally the beginning of very positive paranormal experiences starting to happen. I was living in Dunedin, and it's all in the book, so I'm not going to cover too much of it. If you're wondering what book, it's my book called The Book of One, Returning to Source Wisdom, and I explain the events leading up to my shamanic vision quest. I explain what happened during my vision quest, and then, of course, all the information that came through me and these beings that I met, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that right now. So I never really had positive paranormal experiences until then. And it was during my vision quest. Of course, we did. I don't want to say it was traditional, but I was lucky enough to live. My landlord, actually, I'll tell you this part of the story because it's kind of cool. I was already involved in Wicca at the time. I was 24, 25 years old, and we had a 2-bedroom house, and we used one of the rooms. Me and my roommate slash partner, we used one of the rooms as an altar room, and we would have our rituals in there. And we had 4 or 5 members of the community were there, and we'd perform, full moon ritual and whatnot. And but we kept it closed off. It was like a separate part of the house. Nobody ever saw it. Well, we got a new landlord, and there was like a leak or something. I think the roof was leaking, and he had to go in there to replace the tile. And I was like, oh no. I found out later that he had gone in and he had fixed it, and nobody warned me that he was going in to fix it, or I would have put everything away. And he comes over and he knocks on the door, and I open the door, and I'm like, yeah. And he's like, very interesting room you have back there. I was like, oh no. Here I am in Central Florida, which is, we joke around living in Florida about how, in South Florida is the north, but you move north of Palm Beach, you're in the Bible Belt, you're in the South. And I was like, oh no, he's going to preach to me and all this stuff. And turned out he goes, I really love he started naming items that I had on the altar. He goes, oh, I love your this, or I love your that. He's like, I'm a shaman. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm Algonquin. He goes, I practice Algonquin shamanism. And he's like, come on over. So he brought me over to his house, and he had literally walls and walls of books. I mean, 1,000 books, maybe more, maybe a couple thousand books. And he was like, yeah, I'll teach you. And he gave me a couple books. He let me borrow some books, and he gave me some assignments. He unofficially started training me. And I told him, I said, I'm very interested and doing a shamanic vision quest. He's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, with the medicine? I'm like, yeah, with the medicine, the psychedelic or whatever. So he trained me, and we got it all together, and me and my partner at the time performed it. Now, I don't think my partner's experience was as profound as mine, but during my experience, I felt like I was going to die. Now, let me just set up the environment for you a little bit. Here it is. It's about 5 o'clock at night. I was told to do it at sunset, so that way we could see the transition or sense the transition of going into the darkness. Everything had to be completely black. We blacked out the windows. We covered up things with sheets so they didn't look, like home. We had to create an underworld environment, for lack of a better term. And so the medicine started kicking in, and I felt like I was dying. I thought I was going to die. And I literally felt like I was clinging to life, for lack of a better term. And the moment, suddenly I just gave up. I gave up. I was like, you know what, whatever, I'm dead. And the moment I let go, I literally let go, and I felt myself being pulled up out of my body. And I remember floating up through the ceiling, looking down on the house. Now, this was a little creepy. As I'm looking down on the house, I see these, like, for lack of a better term, they look like flying monkeys, like the Wizard of Oz, flying monkeys, like trying to get into the house. we'd created a protection and, blessed the area and whatnot. And it looked like they were just looking in, trying to get in. Well, meanwhile, I'm floating up higher and higher. And I get onto this, for lack of a better term, a craft. And there's these little blue, white light beings, these bright, bright light blue, for lack of a better term. I can't really put it into words, and they're all standing in a circle and they're looking down at the planet. And they started showing me all the things that were, today I actually talked about it on the Science of Magic show, that they weren't showing me what was wrong with the planet, but they were showing me what the imbalances were. And I saw things like pollution. I saw, they zoomed in on the Ganges River and how it was getting polluted. They zoomed in overpopulated areas. They zoomed in war-torn areas. They zoomed in into financial areas to show me the greed. And it was just very interesting how they had this ability to, like, we were looking down on the planet and just zooming in to different areas of the planet. And as I'm talking to them, I'm like, who are you? What are you? What not? And they're like, we're the emissaries of Light One, and just very gentle and loving. And they're like, we are you, and really profound, weird stuff that I couldn't really figure out what was going on at the time. But after they took me and showed me all the imbalances on the planet, they brought me up into this big golden orb. And I was in this golden orb, and it was just like everything was beautiful, and it was bright light, and I felt, complete and whole, and I felt completely connected with all of the universe and everything and everyone and every planet and every star and every conscious being. And I remember seeing little pieces of that golden light coming down at the Earth. It was almost like I was looking out of a bubble down to the planet Earth. And I saw these little streams of golden light going to the Earth and then coming back up and returning to the golden light, leaving, coming back up. And it was almost as if I was being pushed out. And I was like, no, I don't want to go. This is beautiful. And they're like, you have to go back and you have to show everyone the way back to source. And it wasn't exactly those words, but it was like, show them how to come back here. Show them how to come back here. And of course, boom, I was thrust on. I felt like I was literally dropped from the ceiling onto the couch and kind of woke up. Talk about a profound paranormal experience. So for days after, all this material just kept coming through. Like they were still talking to me, and they were still talking through me, and having me write down all this stuff. And that's kind of how I wrote the book. That is how I wrote the book. But what was so wonderful is that they never left. They kind of just like always stuck around. They kind of like always talked through me. And it wasn't until a few years later, God, what was it, 10, 15 years later, when I was lucky enough to meet Annabelle Montalbano, she was like, you need to bring them through again and finish this book, because I never finished it. And at that time, I had already been involved. From that era on, I was involved in different types of training, initiations and whatnot. I got involved with ceremonial magic. I got involved with other aspects of pagan magic and initiation and whatnot. And I was already channeling this guide. It was a guide, and for lack of a better term, I felt like it was a little Asian guy. I don't know exactly what he was, but during our ceremonies, this guide would come through and speak to the rest of the coven, we did call ourselves a coven. And it was just very interesting because I had just started doing that, and Annabelle was like, well, why don't you bring the emissaries of light through, let them speak through you? And I did start allowing them to channel through me, and I allowed them to speak through me. And we actually started off this radio show. I can't believe it's going to be 10 years. Next year, Treva, it's going to be 10 years the show's been around. But I used to let them speak through me during some of the shows and some of the broadcasts. And actually, I think Annabelle interviewed them, or maybe you, Treva, or I believe Swimming Bird interviewed them a couple times. And I just didn't like, I personally don't like the feeling, the sensation of losing control, for lack of a better term. I was always complaining in the background. I was like, oh, I need a cigarette, or I need to go to the bathroom, when they were trying to come through me. But it was during this time that they began to appear to me in real time. And I remember one time, actually, it was right before I met Annabelle. I was still living in South Florida, and I remember laying in bed, and these beings just like walked through the wall. These little blue beings just walked through the wall and just stood next to my bed and just looked at me. And they were just smiling and looking at me. And I didn't quite put it together. I was like, are these the same light beings that I saw when I left my body? And it turned out that it was. Many years later, after getting involved in doing the work that I do and meeting all the wonderful luminaries and leaders and authors and researchers that I've interviewed over the last 10 years, after speaking with many of them, there's a consensus that most likely these little blue beings are literally Arcturian. You can call them ETs. I prefer to call them transdimensional beings. And so they have become my spirit guides. And while they don't speak through me, I don't really like them to speak through me anymore. They still do come to me in my dreams. I still feel them speaking through me or to me. I still get those quote unquote downloads that we all talk about. And it's just become commonplace for me again. And again, growing up and having all these paranormal experiences were not that big of a deal to me. So when I get a download or some information from them, or I see them in my dreams, it's not like ooh, wow, look, the emissaries of light are here or whatnot. They've just become a part of my life. So it's not really that big of a deal to me anymore. Let me just say that haven't ever had a negative experience with them. Since then, I've been able to do some pretty profound healing on people, healing on myself. As many of you know, I went through some pretty difficult health issues last year, almost died a couple times, brought me right back. And I feel better than I've felt in 20 years. But really positive things have started happening through my contact with them. And if it wasn't through that, I would never be inspired to do the work that I'm doing now. Not only am I doing this radio show, I'm helping people, I'm teaching people to become healers. I run a nonprofit here in the Roanoke Valley, and it really helped me to realize the importance of our time here on this planet and really put things into perspective in the fact that, yes, humanity is going through an awakening. And yes, we must change our priorities, and that's what I've needed to do over the last 10 years. It was time for me to literally prioritize this work, to bring it out to the public, to share my experiences with the public, and to hopefully teach other people to be able to communicate and to become genuine with their awakening experience and allow that awakening experience to become the priority. It's not happening willy-nilly. It's not happening 1 out of 2 million people. It's probably 1 out of 100,000 or 1 out of 1,000 people that are going through this. And as we continue this awakening, as we continue the evolution of humanity, it's going to help us all heal, help the planet heal, help each other heal, and allow the human race to evolve and move us into that ascension that we talk about, that 5D paradigm. So that's why I wanted to talk about paranormal experiences today. I feel I don't talk about them enough. I'm always talking about inspiration, be genuine, the awakening, but what's happening behind the scenes. And if I'm not comfortable talking about it, I can't expect other people to be comfortable talking about it. It's very interesting because people will see me on the street and they'll recognize me, and they'll want to tell me, oh, you were talking about seeing a ghost, or you were talking about meeting a transdimensional light being or whatnot. He goes, and I'm thinking of one particular person, that's why I said he. This gentleman goes, well, I don't want you to think I'm crazy, but And I'm like, I don't. If you feel you went through this experience, please don't think you're crazy. That's the point of what I'm trying to say. These experiences do happen. It doesn't make you crazy. You know what? If people don't get it, that's their problem. I posted a fabulous meme yesterday. You know, what other people think of me is not my problem. It's about me being genuine. And it's about me to be, you know, if we talk about going to the truth, if we talk about living in the truth, then we have to be in the truth of what we've been experiencing, of what we're feeling. You know, if we're having new psychic abilities, talk about it. That's a sign. That's a sign of our evolution of humanity. If we're having very profound or prophetic dreams, talk about it. This is not something to be embarrassed about. If anything, I find it something to be very, very proud of, because you're ahead of the game. You're the next level of human evolution. Human evolution is not about more things, more money, bigger house, better job, being famous, being rich. It's not about that. The evolution of humanity is about our human potential and the infinite potential that is now becoming available to us. And if we can't talk about it, if we are embarrassed about it, what better way to suppress the awakening of humanity than to make them feel humiliated, to make people that are awakening afraid to talk about what's happening to them? What better way to suppress our higher consciousness or consciousness than to shame people? Shaming your evolution is how they win, whatever they are. We have got to become very clear, become very genuine, be truthful, be honest. If at anything, be honest with yourself. You know, I call it coming out of the light worker closet. You know, it's about coming out of the light worker closet, or, you know, we used to call it coming out of the broom closet if you were a pagan. We have to be fearless. We have to be able to speak to somebody about it. And hopefully you'll realize that you're not the only one going through this. Hopefully you'll realize that the things that are happening to you are happening to millions of people around the planet. Our consciousness is evolving. The veil is splitting. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with whatever Bible, book, scroll, tablet you believe in. It has nothing to do with that. Yes, they have little pieces and they point to it, but that's not what it's about. It's about you evolving as a human race. I love you. I'll see you next week. We're going to continue talking a little bit more about this stuff next week. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.